An ordinary grocery trip turns into an unforgettable showdown when an elderly woman tells a young black man to go back to Africa. What he says next doesn't just silence the room, it changes everything. The grocery store was alive with the hum of daily errands. Shoppers pushed their carts through the aisles, some lost in thought, others chatting quietly. It was a sunny afternoon in a small neighborhood in Ohio, a place where everyone seemed to know everyone. But today, the usual flow of routine would break in the most unexpected way. Near the produce section, an elderly woman, probably in her late 70s, stood adjusting her glasses. She had an air of impatience, muttering under her breath as she reached for a bag of apples. Her faded cardigan and carefully pinned silver hair gave her an unassuming look, but what followed was anything but. A young black man, tall and dressed casually in a blue hoodie and jeans, approached the same stand, reaching for a bag of oranges nearby. His name was Daryl. He was calm, polite, and seemed to blend effortlessly into the flow of the store. He was texting on his phone while balancing a basket of groceries when it happened. The elderly woman turned sharply, noticing Daryl's presence, and her expression shifted. It wasn't subtle. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips pursed tightly. "You people don't belong here," she said, loudly enough for others nearby to hear. Daryl froze, his fingers hovering over his phone. When he looked up, she continued, her tone sharp and cutting. "Why don't you go back to Africa, where you came from?" The air seemed to thicken. A couple of shoppers nearby stopped in their tracks. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others pretended not to hear. The rhythm of the store halted, replaced by an awkward silence that stretched far too long. Daryl's initial reaction was shock, his brow furrowed, and for a moment, it looked like he might say something immediately. But he didn't. Instead, he took a slow breath, his face unreadable, as though he was weighing every possible response. The woman, still clutching her apples, stood her ground. Unapologetic and firm, the tension was palpable, and everyone within earshot could feel it. A young mother quickly steered her child away, while an older man near the potatoes glanced nervously at Daryl, waiting to see what he would do. The silence that followed was heavier than any words, setting the stage for what would come next. For a moment, Daryl stood completely still, his hand gripping the handle of his grocery basket. The world around him seemed to shrink, every sound in the store muffled, every face turned in his direction. The weight of the woman's words hung in the air like a bad smell no one could escape. The elderly woman didn't back down. Her stance was defiant, as though she expected no argument. She adjusted her cardigan with a huff, her chin lifted in a way that dared him to respond. A young employee stacking bananas a few feet away froze mid-motion, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. A cashier craned her neck to get a better view. The growing crowd didn't move closer, but they didn't leave either. They were witnesses now, like it or not. Daryl glanced at the woman, his face calm, but his eyes full of thought. 1,000 responses raced through his mind. He could lash out, yell, or storm off, but none of those options felt right. The tension pressed on him like a weight, but instead of breaking, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He shifted his basket to his other hand and straightened his posture, his presence growing larger in the silence. His voice, when it came, was calm but deliberate, cutting through the awkward atmosphere. "Ma'am," he began. His tone was measured. "Do you even realize what you just said?" His question wasn't accusatory. It was reflective, almost like he was giving her a chance to think about her words. But she didn't seem interested in reflection. "I said what I said," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is my country. People like you don't belong here." That was it. A young woman near the bread aisle gasped audibly, and the quiet murmur of the crowd grew louder. Yet Daryl remained steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't take a step closer. Instead, he let the pause stretch, giving her words a chance to settle into the ears of everyone around them. "All right," he said finally, nodding slowly. His calmness was disarming, almost unsettling in its strength. "Let's talk about that, since you brought it up." The room held its breath, waiting for his response. The storm was coming, but it wasn't the kind anyone expected. Daryl shifted his weight, setting his basket down on the floor with deliberate care. His calmness felt like gravity, pulling everyone closer, even those pretending not to listen. He fixed his gaze on the elderly woman, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet determination that made her shift uncomfortably. "You said I don't belong here," he began, his voice steady but firm. "But let me tell you something about where I come from." His words carried weight, each one spoken like it had been carefully chosen. "My great-great-grandfather was born in Mississippi," he said, pausing just enough to let the words sink in. "He was a sharecropper, working land he didn't own, breaking his back so his kids might have a better life. His father, he was a slave, kidnapped, beaten, sold like property. And for what? To help build the very country you're standing in." The woman's lips tightened, but she said nothing. The crowd, however, was transfixed. A man near the dairy section, who had been glancing at his phone, put it down entirely. An older couple whispered to each other, but didn't look away. "My grandfather," Daryl continued, his voice gaining strength, "fought in World War II. Fought for a country that sent him overseas. To risk his life, only to treat him like dirt when he came back. Couldn't sit at the same counters. Couldn't drink from the same fountains. But he stayed. You know why? Because he believed in this country's promise, even when it didn't believe in him." A hush fell over the room. Even the hum of the refrigerators seemed quieter now. "And my parents," he went on, his tone softening but losing none of its intensity, "they fought too. Not with guns or fists, but by working every day, raising me to believe in kindness, respect, and hard work. My mother's a teacher. She spent her whole life helping kids, no matter what they look like. My father, he's a mechanic. The kind of man who'd stop on the side of the road to help someone like you if your car broke down." He let the words settle before continuing, his eyes still locked on hers. "So you're telling me I don't belong here? That I should go back to Africa?" He shook his head slightly, his voice now carrying a hint of sadness. "Ma'am, I'm as much a part of this country as you are. Maybe even more, because my family paid the price for it in blood, sweat, and tears." The elderly woman's face flushed, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her apples. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but stopped, her words catching in her throat. Daryl took a step back, his composure unshaken. "I could have walked away," he said, addressing the entire crowd now. "But what good would that do? Ignorance doesn't get better in silence. It's up to all of us to be better than this, to be better than words like those." The weight of his words lingered, but the story wasn't over yet. The crowd's reaction would speak louder than anything else. The silence after Daryl's words was almost deafening. For a moment, no one moved. The elderly woman's face was a patchwork of emotions: anger, embarrassment, and something deeper, something that looked almost like shame. She glanced around the crowd as if searching for an ally, but none came. A middle-aged man with a baseball cap stepped forward. "He's right," the man said, his voice breaking the quiet. "We got to be better than this." His words seemed to break a spell. An older woman near the frozen foods aisle nodded. "My dad fought in that same war," she said softly, her voice trembling. "He always said the only color that mattered was the red on the flag." The murmurs began to grow. A young cashier, no older than 20, called out from her station, "I've never seen anyone handle something like that so gracefully." "Thank you." The elderly woman, now visibly flustered, clutched her cart tightly. She didn't apologize, but the fire in her eyes had dimmed. Her voice, when it finally came, was quieter, almost pleading. "I didn't mean," she started, but stopped herself. Daryl turned back to her, his expression softer now. "It's not about what you meant," he said gently. "It's about how it came across. Words matter. Actions matter even more." A man from the deli counter clapped slowly, breaking the tension. It was hesitant at first, but then others joined in, the sound swelling into something undeniable. People clapped, not just for Daryl's words, but for the courage it took to confront hate with dignity. The elderly woman looked around one last time, her face pale, before quietly wheeling her cart toward the exit. As she walked away, a few people moved to comfort Daryl. One woman placed a hand on his shoulder and said, Thank you for saying what needed to be said. Daryl smiled faintly, lifting his basket back into his hand. Sometimes, he said, almost to himself, it's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure people hear the truth. The crowd slowly dispersed, the tension in the air replaced by a sense of reflection. Some looked inspired, others thoughtful, but everyone seemed changed in some small way. The moment had passed, but the impact of Daryl's words was far from over. What happened next would leave a lasting impression. As the crowd returned to their routines, the atmosphere in the grocery store felt different, quieter, more thoughtful. Daryl finished his shopping, his steps measured, as if he were processing everything that had just happened. The weight of the moment hadn't shaken him, but it had left him reflective. At the checkout line, the young cashier who had spoken up earlier scanned his items with a shy smile. "What you said back there," she hesitated, then continued. "It meant a lot. People don't always stand up like that, especially with such grace." Daryl smiled back, his tone warm. Sometimes grace is the only way to break through. Anger just builds walls. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As Daryl walked to his car, he noticed the elderly woman sitting in hers, gripping the steering wheel tightly. For a moment, he thought about walking over to her, but he decided against it. Some lessons take time to settle, and he had already said what needed to be said. Later that evening, Daryl sat with his father at the kitchen table, recounting the day's events. His father, a man of few words, listened intently, his hands folded on the table. "You did the right thing, son," his father said finally. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who was watching. People like her. She might not change overnight, but you planted a seed. That's all you can do sometimes. Plant the seed and let it grow." Daryl nodded, his father's words resonating deeply. He realized that while the encounter had been uncomfortable, it was necessary. Ignorance doesn't change unless it's confronted, and silence only allows it to fester. Across town, the elderly woman sat at her dining table, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of her. Daryl's words replayed in her mind, each one cutting through the armor of her assumptions. She thought of her own grandchildren, of the world they were growing up in, and for the first time, she felt a pang of something unfamiliar, doubt. In the days that followed, the story of what had happened at the grocery store spread through the neighborhood. People talked about Daryl's response, his courage, and the dignity with which he handled the situation. It became more than just an incident. It became a lesson, a reminder of the power of words and the importance of standing up for what's right. Daryl didn't seek attention for what he'd done, but his actions rippled through the community in ways he hadn't expected. Strangers approached him with gratitude, sharing their own stories of prejudice and resilience. His quiet stand had sparked conversations that had long been avoided. The elderly woman, too, began to change. It wasn't immediate, but she started to question the beliefs she had held for so long. She didn't know if she'd ever see Daryl again, but if she did, she hoped she'd have the courage to apologize. Moments like these remind us of the power of kindness, strength, and truth in the face of ignorance. They teach us that standing up doesn't always mean shouting. It can mean speaking calmly with conviction and letting the truth do the rest. To everyone watching, let this be a reminder. Your words and actions matter. They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can unite. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Together, we can spread messages of hope, courage, and understanding to create a better world.